With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Lamed Hey. We are continuing the sugya concerning the obligation of Trumas and Maisris to be separated from produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael. And as we have been explaining, that there are various stages prior to a product being completed, prior to Nigman Amalachton, when things are still out there in the field, then there are no restrictions at all regarding our consumption because there's b'chlal no obligation to tithe it. Once produce is considered completed, nigmar malachton, but it did not yet come into the yard, it did not yet come into the house, meaning there was no re'iyas penei bias, even though a person is still allowed to snack from it, but you no longer can have achilas keva. You can't have a proper meal out of that produce. Once something was nigman amalachtan and there was re'iyas penei habayis, now rabbinically you may not even snack from it. That's intro number one. Intro number two, being that there is a mitzvah to have oinik Shabbos, which also includes eating foods on Shabbos. So the concept of a snack, achilas aray, achilas keva, in contrast to achilas keva, doesn't exist on Shabbos. Doesn't exist on Shabbos because the fact that what you're eating, even as a snack, is a mitzvah, it gives it that much chashivus. It's viewed like achilas keva. And therefore, if you have a product that's completed, nigmar malachton, even before you brought it back into your yard, before you brought it back into your house, even prior to the iyas penei habayis, L'kula alma, there's no, it's clear, we see this from the Mishnah, and that Shabbos comes, Shabbos is koiveya lemaisras, which means that now that it's Shabbos, you may not even snack from the product. The question that we began our sugya with on Daf Lamed Alod Amid Beis is what happens if there was something that's not even completed. Not only did it not see the house, not only was it not brought into the yard or into the house, it's not even completed. Still, the question is, does Shabbos have the power to be koiveya it? A Shabbos, you no longer may even snack from it. That was the question. And Rav Nachman, who said he has a tradition, limud aruch hu biyodenu, that Shabbos is koiveya even for a product that's not completed yet. Now, Rav Nachman did not need to bring a source from the Tanoim. He felt, limud aruch biyodenu, this is what he received from his teachers. He was good. The Gemara is looking to find a source for Rav Nachman. So we brought our Mishnah. Now, our Mishnah was speaking about a different topic. And again, just quickly reviewing. When you have foods that are edible, avada, they're not muktzah, they're edible. But if you have foods that are b'chlal not edible, for example, it was common in the times of the Tanoim Amiroim that in order to preserve fruits, there was no refrigeration. Many of them were dried out. Commonly figs and grapes were put up on the roof or put out on the field, and they would stay there until they dried out. Once they dried, they lost their moisture, they would be preserved, they would last much longer. Now, when you begin to dry out these fruits, in the beginning, they're completely inedible. But there comes a certain point where, true, most people would not yet eat it. It's not fully dried out, but it's quasi-edible. It's semi-edible. And the question is, that was our topic. Is it muktzah? So what we learned is that if it's still in the area where it's drying out, that will render it muktzah. That means you left it out. You don't want to eat it on Shabbos. You can't change your mind on Shabbos and say, now I'm going to eat it. But, says Rabbi Eliezer, the two leniencies, only an oral declaration is enough. If a person says, I will be eating some of the product that's on my roof to dry out, I'm going to eat it on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. The fact that he made an oral declaration, that means he's saying that it's not muktzah, it's muchan, it's prepared. Not only that, he doesn't even have to specify which fruits will he be taking down. He just has to say that from what's on the roof, from what's out there in the field where there's no issue of carrying, I'm going to be taking a pound from the 10 pounds. And on Shabbos, he gets to decide which pound was the one that he meant. That was the Mishnah. The nuance that the Mishnah added is that he made that declaration out of Shabbos, but on the Shemitah year. Shemitah is a year in which there are no obligations to tithe. So the Gemara was saying, why did the Mishnah B'chlal have to speak about the Shemitah year? We're speaking about a product that's not fully dried. If it's not fully dried, it's not completed. It's not nigman of malachtan. Why would I even be concerned about trumas omaisis? It must be that even though it's not nigman of malachtan, since it's Shabbos, it's already, you have to tithe it. So the only way the Mishnah can address the muksa issue without having to deal with the meiser issue is by mentioning the sabbatical year. That was the attempted proof, and the Gemara countered, there is no proof from our Mishnah. Why not? Because maybe it's not Shabbos that's going to make it obligated to tithing. Shabbos is not koiveya. The fact that he is saying he's going to be eating from it, he's saying that for him it's completed. So his statement, his oral statement was koiveya, the obligation of meises. And don't forget, if we're speaking about it being on his roof, it's in his house. Has nothing to do with Shabbos being koiveya, so there's no proof from our Mishnah. That's where we left off. Now we're going to continue on the top line. The Gemara is actually going to prove that according to Rabbi Eliezer, as we'll see, Shabbos will be koiveya. However, Rav Nachman's din may not be based on Rabbi Eliezer because we don't paskin b'chal like Rabbi Eliezer. And ultimately, we will not succeed in finding a source for Rav Nachman, which doesn't bother anyone because he feels he doesn't need a source. He received a tradition that Shabbos, Kam Shabbos, whatever you plan to eat on Shabbos, even if it's not even Nigmar Malachton, it has to be tithed prior to Shabbos, even for you to be allowed to snack from it. We will learn Rabbi Yochanan that argues with Rav Nachman. Rabbi Yochanan, again, everyone agrees that Shabbos has the power to be koiveya. If something wasn't fully obligated, Shabbos will bring it into its full obligation, but that's only if the product is considered a finished product. If it's semi-finished, if it's not Nigman Malachim, Rabbi Yochanan, Kam Shabbos, you have no obligation at all to tithe it. This is more or less the conversation all the way until the end of the Perek. And God willing, we'll have time in this class to begin the fifth and the final chapter. And it's a very easy topic. Here we're continuing to learn about this excessive exertion that one may not do on Shabbos nor on Yom Tov. Many times you have counter values. What about if you won't make the exertion, you're not going to have food, or you won't have a proper location to eat in? So sometimes we allow for people to do a certain amount of work, and we will contrast, we will compare Shabbos versus Yom Tov. And in our Mishnah, we're going to point out that Shabbos is a day in which we have to be a bit more stringent than Yom Tov. And what we will appreciate is on Daf Beis, Amid Beis, in the beginning of the Masechta, the Gemara introduced a concept that we will learn again in the fifth chapter, which sometimes goes in the opposite direction. That since Yom Tov is a day in which we're allowed to prepare food, so people, to begin with, they approach Yom Tov very leniently. There are times that the sages were more machman on Yom Tov than on Shabbos, because they said that if we will allow too much on Yom Tov, people will b'chlal say, Yom Tov is just Yom Tov, we can do whatever we want. On Shabbos, people take Shabbos more seriously, so sometimes the sages were more lenient on Shabbos. So sometimes we go in that direction, and in other times we are machmir more on Shabbos than on Yom Tov. We're going to try to find a logic as to when we say what, but let us start again on Daf Lamed Hey, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'achol v'dvarim. So we left off by saying that our Mishnah is no proof to Rav Nachman, because the reason why the Mishnah needed to speak about the Shemitah year, if not for Shemitah, you would have a problem. You would have a problem. You would not be allowed to eat your figs that's in middle of being dried out because you did not take off Trumas or Maasros. But you know why you won't be allowed to eat it? Not because it's Shabbos, because you said you will eat from it. Your declaration renders that product a completed product. The Gemara says that's not correct. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he holds that if a person even actually took something to be eaten, something that's not fully ready, you are allowed at a certain point to put it back where it came from. Just you're physically taking it to eat it doesn't make it halachically considered completed if de facto it's not fully completed. And that's Shitas Rabbi Eliezer. So if taking something to eat doesn't render it halachically completed, saying orally that I plan to eat from it certainly should not make it completed. And therefore, back, l'chura, we should have a proof. We do have a proof from Rabbi Eliezer to Rav Nachman that Shabbos is koiveya, even something shaloi nigmar malachta. V'haloi, behold, moisarai chayzer, and just the words, that if you have a surplus of an item that was not fully completed, but you took it to eat it, and you ended up not eating it, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you can put it back wherever it came from to be fully completed. And we don't say, since you took it physically to eat it, now you have to tithe it. Wherever you are able to put it back, just you being able to put it back, you're taking it loy kavam. So for sure, a oral declaration for sure should not be that which will make the product nigmar malachtan. It should not be koiveya, the product for trumas u'maisers. It must be that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the reason why Rabbeinu HaKadosh needed to mention on the top line on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis Erev Shabbos Shvi is because if it would not be Shemitah, you would be obligated to tithe it. So forget about this whole muksa issue. You can't eat it anyways. And why? Because of Shabbos. So you do have a proof. Where do we find this? Are you able to put back the surplus? Are you not able to put back the surplus? So the Mishnah, a Mishnah in Meisres, is speaking about someone who takes zaysim, who takes olive, min hama'atam, from a vat. Now they would put olives in a vat prior to pressing it. Which olives either were harvested to eat, then they're ready. But then there were olives that were harvested to be made into oil. Until it's rendered into oil, it's not a completed product. In the vat, there would be salt, there would be whatever they would put in there to make it soft. Now, a person has the right to say, you know what? Some of the olives that are in the vat, I want to eat right now. Mamish, similar to the case of the Mishnah, something that normally, as it is, it's not completed yet because it's still prior to it being made into olive oil, but you now want to eat it. So says the Mishnah, if you take a very small amount, you need not be worried about, do I have to separate trumas or maasros? Do I have to tithe it? No. Noitel achas v'achas b'melach. You can take out one, you can take out another one, they would dip it into salt, and you can eat it. But that's only if they take out one and they eat it. They take out one and they eat it. This is a classical case where if something is not yet completed, eating it as a snack is not an issue. Eating it, however, as a meal, so the taval the nasan lefan of asara, if he took out, according to one version 10, according to other versions even 2 at a time. Not he took one and he ate it, then he took another one and he ate it, and there were never 2 together. If there were 2 together, or according to our version 10 together, that means that this is considered a kivius. This is no longer considered a snack, and now you're chayiv. It's sholoi nigmar malachton. No, you took it. If you took it to eat it, that means for you it's complete. It's not the iyas penei habayis. Perfect. Something that's complete prior to the iyas penei habayis, you can snack, but you can't have a kava. Says Rabbi Eliezer that even when you take 10, if the vat is pure, and the Gemara is going to clarify in a moment, and the person is tamei, which means that the olives that he held are tamei, such a person will not put it back. The fact that you are unable to put it back and you have them all gathered together, so then is where we say you're chayiv. But if min hama'aton tamei, but if the vat itself is already tamei, and so is the person, but there's no downside putting back some olives, even though he has 10 olives in front of him, it's not yet considered a finished product. The fact that he doesn't have to eat it, he can put it back, it's not even considered completed. If it's not considered completed, he can have them without tithing, even if it's a larger amount. As we explained before, nigmar malachton, there are no restrictions. Patur, because he's able to put it back. Now, before we come back over here again, what difference does it make if the vat is stored, if the vat is tummy? And but the person is tummy. The person is tummy. It's not that he can't. He technically could. He just won't. He will not put it back because now that he made the olives that he touched tummy, putting him back will render everything else under that tummy, and no one would do that. You make the prices fall if the product became tamei, and the seifa is ribema'atan tamei, and the gavra is tamei. Anyways, it's tamei. The matzah mahadali. So bottom line is, we see from Rabbi Eliezer that even if when you take something to be eaten, if you are able to put it back, it's not called nigmar malachta. So an oral declaration, certainly you didn't even take it. You just said, I will take tomorrow on Shabbos from from my figs that are semi-dried out. It should not make it nigmar malachta. What does it make it nigmar malachta? Why is there a Maisris issue? Why did the Rebbe have to mention Shvi'is? Because Shabbos is koveya. So the Gemara says no. That must nisanami be'muktzah tahar. The food that's on the roof is pure. The person is tamei, and therefore, if he will take it, he's unable to put it back. Says the Gemara, whoa. Our Mishnah, he is speaking about a case where he b'chlal didn't take it. That's the whole case of the Mishnah. It's laying on the roof to dry. That was the whole chiddush of Rabbi Eliezer versus the sages. The sages holds that he has to mark them. He has to take them. Rabbi Eliezer holds that only an oral declaration is enough. They're already there. And therefore, indeed, that from our Mishnah, from Rabbi Eliezer, we see that which Rav Nachman taught. Shabbos is koveya, even for a product that's sholoi nigmar malachtan, but elo amar apshimi bar ashi, that what? Oh, Rabbi Eliezer Kamrat. Rabbi Eliezer at the time made the Amar Truma Kava. You're right. According to Rabbi Eliezer, Shabbos is koveya lamaisras, even sholoi nigmar malachtan. But you know what? Rabbi Eliezer also says the same concept regarding other things that could be koveya. Point is that you can't prove anything from Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer has a unique opinion. Now, what does truma mean? Again, very simple. If you have a product that's not completed, you didn't bring it into your house, there is zero obligation to tithe it. You can even have a meal from it. What happens if you, the owner, decided to separate truma prior to nigmar malachta, and for sure prior to you bringing it home? You know what Rabbi Eliezer says? If you separated truma, now you may not eat it until you separate Ma'aser Isha and until you separate Ma'aser Sheni. In other words, there are certain things that if a person does one thing, he brings it into the obligation of tithing. So Rabbi Eliezer that holds that if you separate truma, then you are koveya everything else in that pile, and you have to separate all other, then for sure Rabbi Eliezer will indeed hold the same thing regarding Shabbos. But there is no proof if you don't follow Rabbi Eliezer. Where do we find the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer? The Tanan, Peidish Tanaman. If you decided to give truma prior to the obligation, but you just got it out of the way, says Rabbi Eliezer, you may not even eat a snack from it anymore. And the Chachamim are matir. And again, therefore, Rabbi Eliezer is different, but you can't prove Rav Nachman from the Chachamim. So the Gemara says, no, I'll try to prove Shitas Rav Nachman from our Mishnah, from the Chachamim. So Tashema, and our Mishnah says in the Sefer, the Chachamim. First of all, they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. An oral declaration is not good enough to take something out of the status of Muktzah and make it into Muchan. Forget about Trumas for a second. You have to mark it. And not only that, you have to specify which ones will you be taking. You don't subscribe to Bereda. And the Yom Mikan Ve'atkan. So let's analyze the case of the Mishnah of Shemitah for the Chachamim. Here again, Kaima, the Erev Shabbos B'Shvis, which is why the Lav Bar Isurei, who there's no obligation to tithe anything on Shemitah. Then those fruits, even if you mark them and you made a specific declaration, it would still be inedible. Why? My Tama, Melav Mishum, the Shabbos Kava, so I have a raya from the Chachamim, because don't forget, the Mishnah mentions the case of Shemitah, even the Chachamim. So says the Gemara, not from our Mishnah, loy, because I can tell you, Shani Hassan, Kiven the Amar Mikan Va'arkan Ani Yoichel, Lomacher, just like we said before. Maybe here, yes, there's going to be an obligation. That's because you specified the ones that you will be eating. That's different. If you specified it, then for you it's considered Gemar Malachton, not because of Shabbos. Well, if that's the case, like we had at the end of yesterday's shiur, my Iriya Shabbos Afilu B'Choil Nami, right? Then this should be an issue even connected to the weekday. So the Gemara says that's not a problem because the Mishnah mentioned Shabbos to tell you another nuance, as we spoke out, that even though rabbinically one is not allowed to tithe, not on Shabbos, not on Yom Tov, if one did it, it's not muksa. You can't say that it's like a keli shemalachta le'isr. You can't say that since this may not be tithe, then for sure you won't eat it, and therefore it's muksa. No. It's edible. You could tithe it. The Chachamim does not allow the person to tithe it, but if the person violated and they tithed something, it is not muksa. The tevel muchro etzel Shabbos, meaning she'im avar, which he should not have, and v'tiknai misukim. Bottom line is that from our Mishnah, and don't forget the refutation that we had on top of the Amid is only Rabbi Eliezer that holds that if moisroi choizer loikava, the Chachamim don't subscribe to that. So our Mishnah cannot be used at all as a proof to Rav Nachman. Our Mishnah, the reason why there is an obligation to tithe it, not because it's Shabbos, but because you decided to eat it. Very much like the case we had on Daf Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis, where if you had a parent that harvested figs to dry it, the kid took some of those figs and he hid them to eat it on Shabbos, then a cover because he plans to eat it. So we are left without a source. Now, before we go and introduce Rabbi Yechanan, who argues with Rav Nachman, the Gemara is going to point out a contradiction between Rabbi Eliezer himself. Frek the Gemara on Rabbi Eliezer, I have a problem with his opinion. Meaning, it says in a Mishnah, Trumois, that if a person is eating from a cluster of grapes and he walks from his garden into the yard, so what happened before when the product is completed, but you did not bring it in your yard, you did not bring it into your house, you are allowed to snack. This guy is snacking, but as he's snacking, he walks into his yard. When you walk into your yard or into your home, you may not even snack. So do we say that that's it? You got to stop? Rabbi Eliezer says Yigmoy. Why? Because the Mishnah must be speaking about a scenario where the grapes are not completed. They are going to be designated for wine. You eating it now is still considered a product that's not nigmar malachton fully. And when there is no even gemar malachton, bringing it into the house doesn't obligate you not even to be able to allow to snack from it. Rabbi Yeshua Oymen lo yigmar, because Rashi says true that we still could view the cluster of grapes as not completed if this was designated to make wine, but the re'iyas penei chotzer is koiveya even if there's no nigmar malachton. Now, weiter choshcha b'leil Shabbos. Similarly, you're eating grapes on Friday against grapes that's not nigmar malachton. Comes along Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer Oymer Yigmar. Rabbi Eliezer holds that you are allowed to finish. Why? Because Shabbos is not koiveya for something that's not nigmar malachton. Now we got a problem. That's a problem because we just established that what Rav Nachman said is based on Rabbi Eliezer. It's not good enough of a proof because we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. But the Rabbi Eliezer will hold that Shabbos is koivas even for something that shaloi nigmar malachton. That seems to go against the Mishnah and Trumos. Rabbi Yeshua says lo yigmar again because he holds that Shabbos is not koivea for something that shaloi nigmar malachton. So what does Rabbi Eliezer hold? Our Mishnah seems Rabbi Eliezer holds Shabbos is that powerful. Koiveas lamasid even shaloi nigmar malachton. They are not. Answers the Gemara, Hassan Keduktani Taimam, Rab Nassan in a Beitzah. Adds to the Mishnah that Loi Kisha Amar Rabbi Eliezer Yigmar means B'chatza Yigmar. Once it's in the yard, you can't eat it. In there. It only means that Eloyoytze Chutz L'chatza V'Yigmar, you have to go back out and eat it. That's not negate to our topic. But the next line says Rabbi Nassan, V'loi Kisha Amar Rabbi Eliezer Yigmar. When he says that you can finish it on Shabbos, he doesn't mean that you can finish it on Shabbos. It's not the Shabbos Yigmar. Ela mamtin l'motzoi Shabbos v'Yigmar. You have to wait until Motzei Shabbos. So that's a very interesting nuance. Now, if Tzvika here, he pointed out from the Mishnah that we had on Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis, if you have a fig that's completely edible. It's fresh. It's just that the owners, the parents are planning to dry it out. When the child takes that and he designates it, he hides it for a Shabbos snack, that's such a completed product that we learned befedish in the Mishnah that you may not even eat it Matzah Shabbos as a snack. But that's because it's a bona fide nigman malachta. It's the parents is putting it out to dry, which renders it then not completed. These types of grapes were grapes that were planted, says Rashi, in order for you to make wine. It's never considered a bona fide good grape to eat. It's never a real nigman malachta. So if something is taka, not nigman malachta, Shabbos l'Rabbi Eliezer is koivas only for Shabbos. The moment Shabbos leaves, you can go back to eating a snack. And bottom line will be that according to Rabbi Eliezer, true, even if something is not completed, Shabbos will obligate the owners to tithe it on a level that you may not even snack from it. But not Rabbi Eliezer. We don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. We have no source, we have no proof for Rav Nachman, but Rav Nachman is not refuted. Rav Nachman has such a tradition, and that shitas Rav Nachman. And now the Gemara brings the one who argues with him. He also Ravin. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he quoted the great Rabbi Yechanan that says whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Truma, like we mentioned above from Rabbi Eliezer, something is not completed, but you decided to designate Truma. Or if you brought it into your yard, not nigman malachton, or mikach, if a purchase was done. You see, there's another rule that selling a product also renders it chashuv. You're selling it, someone is buying it. And as we'll see, some Tanoim hold that even if a product is not nigman malachton, the moment a sale was made, the sale establishes the obligation for tithing. Rabbi Yechanan says no. Even regarding mekach kulam, Ein koivim, they only have the power to establish an obligation to the point that you can't even snack before you tithe it. Ela b'davar shenigman malachton, only if it is a completed product. And if it's not completed, not Shabbos is keveya, and not Truma is keveya, and not Chatzir is keveya, and not Mikach is keveya. And now we're going to go through every case to see that there is a machlokes tanoim to appreciate how Rabbi Yechanan is siding with one against the other. Shabbos. Now we could have said, by the way, la'afuke mi Rabbi Eliezer. So says Tosfos. We just showed that Rabbi Eliezer holds that Shabbos is keveya even b'davar shaloi nigman malachton, which is the case of our Mishnah. That's fine, but Hillel is also such a lone voice. The Tanya hama'amer peiris mamakam lamakim. If a person is gathering fruits from one location to the other, liktsois, it has to be to dry. In other words, he gathered it to dry out a fruit or grains, whatever is left out to dry until it's completely dried out is not a completed finished product. And the Kaddish Le'amayim Shabbos, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Hillel la'atzma yoiser. Only Hillel holds that you can't even snack from it because Shabbos is kreveya, even b'davar shaloi nigman malachton. Now, I know it's not only Hillel, it's against Rabbi Eliezer. Doesn't matter. In other words, they are lone voices. They are the minority view. And Rabbi Yechanan is saying we don't paskin like them. Daf lamed hamid beis. Chatzir, as we just learned above, and here we have another case. Lafukim mid Rabbi Yaakov. We just had the Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, but he's bringing the following Mishnah. The Tanan hamaver te'enim b'chatzeri liktsois. If a person is spreading out figs in his field, in his yard, to have them dry, you can snack from it. And you don't have to tithe it because that's the rule. It's not yet nigman malachton. Now here it's not being spread out to dry in the field; it's being set out to dry in your yard. So chatzir is not koivas enough to say you can't even snack from it. And v'tani Allah that Rabbi Yaakov is machayev. Rabbi Yaakov will hold that chatzir is koiveya l'maisres. Even b'davar shaloi nigman malachton, and Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Yehuda, like the Chachamim in the Mishnah, hold pointed. So Rabbi Yechanan is paskening like the Mishnah, like Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Yehuda, not like Rabbi Yaakov. We can also say, as we just mentioned before, and not like Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shua, yeah. I'm sorry, and not like Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua holds that chatzin is koivas b'davar shaloi nigman malachta. Truma, where do we have this concept that if something is not completed, but if the owner separated trumais, that is koiva aslamasid, that's lafuki mid Rabbi Eliezer. The Tanan, another Mishnah Meisters. If a person decided to separate truma, is just the first step of truma, but they separated truma before the product was finalized. There was no obligation to do so, but they did it. Rabbi Eliezer says, aha, you separated truma. Now, until you separate all else, Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, or Meiser Rishon, Meiser Ani, then Oiser le'echol mehem, even Arai, and the Chachamim are matirin. Even though you separated trumas, so what? It's loy nigman malachton. And the final statement of Rabbi Yechanan regarding nikach, regarding a purchase, regarding a sale, is either kidetnan or we haven't decided kidetanya. It says in a brayso, halakeyach te'enim ha'amaretz. If a person buys figs from the amaretz, I just got the words chaver versus the amaretz. In the beginnings of the times of Bayis Sheni, Rabbi Yechanan Kohen Gadol saw that there's a certain lax feeling towards properly tithing your produce. Everyone would separate truma, but there were certain maisres that there was a question mark whether everyone properly did it. So a takana was made that unless you buy produce from someone who you know is called a chaver means someone who's very meticulous in tumantara, in separating all of the tithings, you have to, as a doubt, separate some tithings. You don't have to separate truma. We're not going to go through all the details right now. Meiser Rishon, you only separate to take from it trumais meiser, which you have to give to the kohen, but the Meiser Rishon itself you get to keep. So he says, if you buy figs from an amaretz, if it's in a place where most people are going to dry the figs and then press them into rings, in other words, in a place where most people don't eat fresh figs, so fresh figs in this location is not nigmar malachton. So the din is, you are allowed to eat from it only as a snack. However, asron demai. Now, what he really means to say is that even though it's not nigman malachton, this Tana holds that the sale brings about, right? The sale does not bring about a total obligation to separate trumas from meisers. So if you're only having a snack, you can still eat from it. But if you want to eat a keva, now that you did a sale, even though they're not dried out, but a keva you can't have. Oh, now what's interesting is that when you have to separate truma from meisers, also you don't have to separate everything. You don't have to separate truma. When you are ma'asidit, you only have to be ma'asidit as the mai. Which means that even the amaretz, who was generally lax in separating trumas from meisers, and everyone knows that before the product is final, you don't have to separate anything. You don't have to separate even truma. But people would not sell what they grew without first separating truma, even the amaretz. So it's interesting. On one hand, they were lax, but there's certain rules that they kept, trumas that they kept it very good. They kept it so stringent that, again, even though this is a location where people did not eat fresh figs, so he was selling a product that's not finished yet, but he would never sell it without separating truma. So when you are ma'asidit, you only have to be ma'asidit on the level of the mai. And Shema Mina, says the Gemara, from here we see three things. Number one, Shema Mina, like Rabbi Yechanan, that even though you made a sale, because if a mekach would be fully koivas, even b'davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi, then you would not be allowed even to eat arai. You would not even be allowed to snack. And number two, Shema Mina, that roiv amei haaretz ma'asrin hein. Shema Mina ma'asrin demai ma'am haaretz. Afilu b'davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi. Gewaldig, which is a big chiddush. And not to say that if it's davar shaloi nigmar malachtoi and you bought it from an am haaretz, then you have to take off all of the trumas of meisers. We never say that. Okay. Now, so that is the shita of Rabbi Yechanan. Now, who argues with this? Where do we find an opinion that holds that the fact that you made a sale with product with produce that grew, produce, fruits, vegetables, that in itself renders this food so obligated to tithe that you can't even snack from it. Who holds of that? Says in a Mishnah, this is called in English bartering. You're not selling for money, but I have produce, you have produce, and we're switching it. So that if I am planning to eat what I'm receiving from you, you are planning to eat what you are receiving from me. That's called zelechol v'zelechol. Or if both of us are planning to take the produce that we are receiving and we're going to put it out to dry, zeliksois v'zeliksois. So far, both of them either are viewing the product as finished, or both are viewing the product as not completed, not finished. Or that's the third case, zelechol v'zeliksois. One is planning to eat it as it is. The other one is planning to dry it out. Says the Tanach, that's not like Rabbi Yechanan, Tana. He says all of them are obligated to tithe everything before eating it. They may not even snack from it. It's not completed. And you have cases where people still plan to put it out to dry. That's the point. The fact that you made a sale with a product, it makes it chashuv, and therefore the obligation of Trumas u'Maasros kicks in. There's a kivius, there's an obligation. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, only in the case where lechoil, if the product is viewed by its current owner as something that I will be eating from it as it is, which means it's nigman malachton, then you're chayiv to tithe it. But whoever is planning still to put it out lick size to dry, meaning it's not nigman malachton, here you're going to be potter, and Rabbi Yechanan rules like Rabbi Yehuda. Yovaldik. And with this we say, Hadan Alocha Mevi. So now we concluded the sugya of Trumas u'Maasros, and we're going to come back to a pure laws of Shabbos and Yom Tov. We are beginning the fifth and the final chapter of Beitzah. And again, the final topics that we have been learning was, Tircha Yiseda or Tircha Shaloi L'Tzoirach, all these types of interesting concepts that we understand, but their application is very challenging, as we'll see in our Mishnah. And the Mishnah begins with a case, again, still a continuation of people who would put food items on their roofs in order for it to dry. That was a common practice then. And the case of the Mishnah is where a person had wheat or barley, says Rashi, that you'll put out on your roof for it to dry. And all of a sudden, the forecast looks like it might rain. If rain will fall on your produce, it will ruin. So you now want to save your merchandise, your food, but that will demand of you to work, to make exertion, tircha an Yom Tov. So of course, if you need to make exertion to eat that on Yom Tov, it's a non-issue. Gesundheit. Here we're speaking about a person that's not concerned for what will I eat on Yom Tov or what will I eat on Shabbos. I'm concerned with my produce not getting ruined. A very practical scenario. So it's how much work is one allowed to do. We're not speaking about violating, transporting. We're not breaking any malachas. We're speaking about the concept that Shabbos and Yom Tov are meant to be days of rest. This is more based on psukim that we have in Nach. So they have menucha. You're not letting them do extra work. So says the Mishnah that we differentiate Shabbos versus Yom Tov. For this, we are more machmer on Shabbos and we allow leniencies on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, mashilin, the word mashilin means to lower. One is allowed to lower. Peiros, Rashi says, chitin and so'erin. Derech haruba through a skylight on Yom Tov. But here's the kicker. Skylight means that getting the produce from your roof into your house is the easiest scenario. Skylight means that mamash on the roof there's an opening and you lower it through the opening. That's a lot easier for you walking it down the fire escape. That's a lot easier than you lowering it with a rope to put it into a window on the side of the house. That is already considered too much work. That's the line in the Mishnah. Some exertion is allowed, too much is not allowed. Let's use the words Anashi. Look inside the Rashi in the beginning of the Perek. Mashilin Peris derech haruba. You may lower produce through the skylight. You put out chitim and siyorim on your roof, lihis yabesh, for it to dry out, and you see that the rains are memash mishinubai, and it's starting to concretize. The clouds are getting dark. He tiroloi litroyach they allowed you to exert a little bit, and to throw the produce derech aruba shemegag through the skylight. The heim loy from the aretz, and they fall down, or you can't lower it with the rope. You just push it in there. The leka tircha yisera, because pushing something through the skylight tircha, but it's not yisera. The dafka aruba, dafka skylight. The chal aruba is milmayla lamatli betikra second. The word aruba only refers to something that's mamish, like what we call a skylight. Aval chaloin, but if there's a window, going for example, normally you have a roof, and on this, like by us in our homes, and if you're standing on the roof and you want to put something through a window, you have to lower it through the side of the house, and you have to make sure with the rope that it hits, it aligns with the window. Then you have to swing it into the window. That is something that demands what the Chachamim will coin tircha yisera, excessive exertion. And even though you're going to lose,
Rabbi, without a skylight, then you're stuck with the financial loss.
Yes, Baruch, exactly. That's what the Mishnah is saying. And I'll go more than that. Look, that's a good picture. In other words, even if you don't have to lower it, Kevin is showing a picture where you have a window, you just have to lift it. You have to lift it. That's too much work. It's only when it's a skylight and you just push it through. On Shabbos, you always have to suffer the loss. Let's go inside the Mishnah. Avol loy b'Shabbos. I'm saying it's challenging how to apply these concepts in the modern world, but at least we have the framework. Tircha, to prevent financial loss, is permitted on Yom Tov and not on Shabbos, and even on Yom Tov, only if it's not yeseda, only if it's not excessive, only if it's relatively minimal amount of exertion. Another din in the Mishnah, din number 2, umachasen peiros bekelim epnei hadelef. According to Rashi, many people argue this is also only on Yom Tov. Something similar, you have produce and it's about to rain, and your solution will be to cover it with a cloth, spreading a cloth on it. It's not a lot of work, you're just spreading a cloth. You are allowed to do it on Yom Tov. And if you have barrels of wine and barrels of oil, and as we will see that there, if it rains on the barrels, there's much less loss. Okay, so the barrels get wet, so maybe some water seeps in and it downgrades the quality of the wine. It's not falling directly on the produce. Doesn't matter how big the loss is. Same concept is that on Yom Tov, according to Rashi, only on Yom Tov you are allowed to worry and cover it with blankets or with other materials to prevent it from getting wet, and not on Shabbos. And din number 3, the noisnen keli tachas hadelef b'Shabbos. Here we introduce the concept of a much greater financial loss. Now, as much as we don't want to lose the produce, real estate, a home has much greater value. It always was that way. So what happens if there's a leak in your home? There's a leak in the home, and your floors will get ruined. Your walls will get ruined. So here says the Mishnah, not only on Yom Tov, but even on Shabbos, you are allowed to put out bowls to receive the water that's leaking in. And like we're going to learn in the Gemara, even if the bowls get filled up relatively quick, and you're going to be busy Shabbos and Yom Tov, emptying out the bowl, putting the bowl back. Whoever today has an air conditioning leak, that's more or less what happens. That is something that you are allowed to do, even on Shabbos, and for sure on Yom Tov. What's the difference between your home and produce? It's about what we call a big financial loss or a small financial loss. Now, Baruch, all this makes things in halacha a little bit complex, because what's going to happen if the produce that you have on your roof is very valuable? It could make a difference. If for you it's considered a great financial loss, in other words, there is in halacha this concept that the moment you're going to have a large financial loss, however you measure that, is it relative? Is it not relative? It could be it's relative. Then even on Shabbos things are permitted. But the cases the Mishnah gave were 3. You're allowed to lower it through a skylight. You are allowed to cover it with a cloth only on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. If it's raining in your house, then putting out kalim to receive the water, to prevent the water getting all over the place, is allowed even on Shabbos, even if there's a lot of exertion, because if not, you're going to lose your house. Okay.
So how would it be different than how we learned from a few classes ago, when there is a fire in the house that you're not allowed to save stuff out of the
Very good. I'm happy you're saying that. So here's the thing. When it comes to putting out a fire is a biblical violation. One of the Lama Tes Malachas is putting out a fire. For biblical violation, we don't care at all about laws.
On Shabbos, right?
On Shabbos. When it comes to exertion, see, that's already not, the Torah doesn't say in the that you don't do exertion on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. The Torah says don't break work. Now, we have a concept that aside of the Lama Tes Malachas, it's a day of rest. It's a day in which you're not supposed to overexert yourself. These are not biblical obligations. It's only a midrabanan. So here, there's a lot more leniency.
So if I were to block the fire, not to put it off, I'm allowed to.
So we learned in Masechta Shabbos, if I'm not mistaken, that in an indirect way, if I'm not mistaken, there was a case where you're going to put up barrels filled with water, and when the fire comes to that barrel, it's going to break the barrel. So the water is going to put out. I think that's something that you were allowed to do. Now, by the way, when it comes to a fire, just the poyel mamish, I'm not talking about people that live out there, that they have no neighbors nearby. But nowadays, fires must be put out on Shabbos, even if you know that in your home no one is there, because the proximity of houses, even here in LA, one and the other is very close, and a fire could kill someone. And even if it's a very small doubt, pikuach nefesh is something else. Okay, don't forget that. Let's go over here. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time, and the Gemara does it every now and then. Like Menachotza, we began with complicated dinim, relatively complicated dinim for the first time. We're going to go to semantics. The Mishnah uses the words mashilin without an aleph to lower. The Gemara is going to point out that there are many other words that are similar but not the same that could be used to express lowering. Says the Gemara Itna, Rav Yehuda and Rav Nassim. One of them actually had in his tradition that our Mishnah uses the word mashilin the way we have it, lowering. V'chad tane mashchilin. He had a ches in there. He added the ches in there. And Amar Marzutra, I want you to know that both versions are correct. The one who had mashilin, there was no corruption in his tradition. Don't forget, all this was learned by heart. It's amazing. They had everything by heart, and if there was a letter off, we want to make sure to get it right. But they're both good versions. And we'll prove it. Because I'm recording a pasuk in Ki Sava in the Toichecha that even that's like a curse, that even if a person is going to have a lot of olive trees, but they won't have any oil. Why? Ki yishal zeisechem, because the trees are going to throw down the olives. In other words, the Torah uses the words yishal for something being, for some fruit falling off a tree. That's the source of mashilin, means to fall. To fall means to lower. That's what falling is, from higher to lower. The Tanach, Mishnah Mechonos, speaking about blemishes that disqualify an animal to be used as a carbon, hashochoil, the hachosoil, are two blemishes that disqualify an animal. Balimum. What is shochoil? Shochoil means shenishmata yerechoi, that if an animal's hip is dislocated, but when an animal hip gets dislocated, it like falls down. That's where you see the word shochoil means to lower, to fall down. And kasel means that one hip is higher than the other. But that's the source of mashchilin. I want to tell you that there are other words. Now, the following aren't versions that they found, but they will point out that even if later you'll find another version to the wordings of the Mishnah, they are also going to be correct. That whoever would have the words mashirin, which also would mean to lower, loy mishtabesh, will not be wrong. Umandatame mashchirin, loy mishtabesh. Umandatame manshirin, also loy mishtabesh. Three other words that could be used for the same thing. And now we have to show how each word in another context indeed means to lower. Mandatani mashirin loy mishtabesh, ditnan, Mishnah Nazir, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, one of the negatives that a Nazir has to abstain from is cutting his hair. So Nazir lo yochif roishay ba'adama, he may not rub his hair, his head, with earth. That was the Johnson & Johnson, whatever name of your shampoo is. That was a great shampoo. You can imagine they would take earth and they would rub it into the hair. But you can't do that because it causes hair to fall out. as haseyor. So here you see that the word mashir, falling out, can also mean lowering. Again, falling and lowering here is synonymous. Uman detani mashchir lemishtabish. The Tanan, a Mishnah concerning the laws of Tum and Tara. Normally, if a utensil broke, then the broken part cannot become tummy. Even more, even if the keli was already tummy, now that it broke, the broken part is tar. But there are certain utensils that even though that like a scissor, even though a scissor comes with two blades, but even if it breaks in the way where you have now one blade and another blade, each blade is still considered a bona fide usable utensil, so it's still susceptible to becoming tummy. And the same thing is with the razor. What type of razor, I don't know. If it's a double blade edged razor or if it's the handle with the razor, there's many versions as what exactly razor are we talking about. But the words are that ha-shechoir, that's razor, that's the mashchirim. Now, it's amazing. Since the word shechoir means a razor, and a razor falls hairs, it cuts hairs off. So if we want to use the word lowering, we can borrow the word mashchirin, and that's still okay. It's still a stretch, but it's connected somehow with hair falling out through cutting it with the razor. But shchor literally means a razor or a zug shal saparim, a barber's scissors, even if they came apart. In those utensils, each separate part is still usable by themselves, therefore tamei. And the final, the word manshinin also means to fall. The Tanan, if a person on Shabbos got his clothing filled with water, what's the problem? Some chacham jumped into a swimming pool. Problem is that we're not allowed to clean garments on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. And if I look at you walking around with soaked garments, maybe I'm going to suspect that you washed your clothing. And there are certain activities that we may not do, not to give the wrong impression. But here, there's no problem. Says the Mishnah, whoever's kalim means clothing here, became soaked in water, mahalach, you can even walk in them. And don't be choishesh that someone will suspect that you cleaned them on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. And the words are nashru. Nashru means your garments fell into water. That's how they got soaked. So again, just expressions of falling. Inami, another Mishnah, it says, Ezeu leket, which are one of the obligations of the part of our produce that has to be left for the poor in the Holy Land, hanoisher b'shas ketzira. If something falls at the time of reaping, that's the final word that you see that it means falling. Okay, now let's get to the content. Tonight we learned in our Mishnah. Mashilem Peres, derech haruba, you are allowed to lower produce preventative. You are afraid it's going to rain on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. Now, the Mishnah never spoke about a quantity. The Mishnah said through the skylight, which implies not through a window. Not through a window because excessive exertion is not allowed. So the Gemara takes it as a given. If there is something called excess that's not allowed, then even through the skylight, there has to be quantitatively that much produce that's called excessive. And indeed, the Gemara says, at kama, how much produce can you lower? What happens if you're a rooftop, you're living in the palace of King Solomon? You have 500 pounds of produce on your rooftop, but you can lower it just because it's through the skylight. There's got to be a limit. Now that we are saying that derech haloin loin, tircha yisera no. So there has to be a limit in quantity even through the skylight. So Amar Abzei, Amar Abasi, or Amar Asi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, we're making a linkage. And the linkage will continue on Daf Lamed Vav between our Mishnah here in Beitzah, Chevre, and a Mishnah that we had in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Chav Vav. Let me say by heart. What did we learn in Shabbos? You are planning to give a class. People are coming to learn. And so many people came and they don't fit in your dining room. But you have a other room that is filled with storage items. Are you allowed to clear it out? The issue there is not about carrying, it's about exertion. Can you clear out a location either for people to learn or if you're invited guests, and wherever you thought they're going to fit, they don't fit. So there we also learned to limit. We learned in the Mishnah that nefanin, Arba v'chamesh kupei shel teven, that if you have a location that's packed with boxes of straw, you are allowed to clear out 4 or 5. In Shabbos, we learned what's 4 or 5. Make up your mind. Is it 4 or is it 5? The Gemara speaks about that there. But that was the limit. 4 or 5 boxes, or of tfuah, or of grains. Either it has to be for a mitzvah, either because you need a place to put your orchim, or because people are going to learn Torah, and if they won't be comfortable and they won't have a larger location, they won't learn properly. So just like there, we learned the limit of 4 or 5. Here also, even though our Mishnah never mentioned a quantitative amount, it must be 4 or 5 boxes, and there were standard sizes boxes. And look in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Chava for more details. Only that amount is allowed to be lowered through the skylight on Yom Tov. On Shabbos, never. Even on Yom Tov, never through a window. Is whatever is allowed. There is a limit. Says the Gemara. I disagree with that. No, how can you compare our Mishnah and Beitzah and over there in Shabbos? Vidilma Shani Hassan. Over there, the Bittul Beis HaMedrash. But over here, Bittul Beis HaMedrash or guests. Avol Hache, the Leka Bittul Beis HaMedrash. Here, it's only about finances. It's not about a mitzvah. Maybe even less. Maybe. Loy. We're not saying nothing. The Mishnah says you could, but how can you compare? Or you can go in the reverse. Inami. Hasamaynu Tama. The Arba V'chamish Kupei Shari. Mishum Shabbos. Maybe over there they allowed. Another reason why here should be more stringent. Over there, it's Shabbos. Now, guys, we had this line on Daf Beis Amud Beis, and it goes against what we learned in the Mishnah. The principle of the Mishnah is that for Shabbos, we're more stringent, and for Yom Tov, we're more lenient. Because at the end of the day, we see that God allows you to make food preparations, and mitoich, many other things. Here, we sometimes say the opposite. What do we say? Shabbos is chamira. Everyone knows Shabbos, Yisur Kodesh, Shabbos, you can't do anything. So therefore, there are scenarios where the sages felt no need to add stringencies because no one will take it lightly. But when it comes to Yom Tov, since really it is more lenient, the kill. So again, maybe klal v'klal loy. Now klal v'klal loy doesn't mean you won't be allowed to lower anything. The Mishnah says you can lower. His point is you can't compare that case to our case. Number one, there's a mitzvah there. Number two, Shabbos. And sometimes Shabbos allows us to be more lenient. Or in the opposite. Maybe there they only allowed 4 or 5 and not more because there's no financial loss. And the halacha takes into account financial loss. But over here, since the Ika Hefsid Mamoin, maybe Afila Tuvanami, maybe they will allow for you to lower much more than 4 or 5. And therefore, he rejects this comparison. Now, we're going to conclude over here. I do want to speak out the Rashba that actually points out how do you reconcile it? Like, do we say Yom Tov we can be more lenient, or do we say no Shabbos Chamira Deloy Asal Zilzule Yom Tov the Kil Asal Zilzule? So the Rashba says very good. He says let's use Kamus and Echos when the question is whether an activity itself is allowed or not. We limit more for Shabbos and we open up more for Yom Tov, whether you can do something or not. Once something is allowed and the question is in quantity, here we go in the opposite direction. We put more limits on Yom Tov because if you're going to end up doing without any limit, then people will take the whole thing very lightly. And on Shabbos, once something is already allowed, then the Chachamim did not restrict quantity. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule because we just learned the case that on Shabbos there is a limit of 4 or 5 boxes. I get that. But this is the generally approach of the Rashba and it fits. Kamus Echos, if it's a question whether Bechlal something is allowed or not, generally you will find that more things are allowed on Yom Tov and less things allowed on Shabbos, like our Mishnah. You can lower it through the skylight on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. But once an activity that's allowed, if the discussion is how much of it, you will see many times that on Yom Tov we were concerned that people will take the whole Yom Tov lightly, so they did put more limits than on quantity on Shabbos. We'll stop over here. A lot more of this, God willing, to be continued.
So in our case, using the Rashba, we're talking about Yom Tiv,
Yeah.
that would be a rationale to limit even more, less than the 4 or 5 that is
That's
allowed.
why that's actually that if I'm not mistaken, that's why we find the Gemara gave 2 reasons to limit it more, and only 1 reason to limit it less. More reasons to limit it more. It fits with the Rashba. I think the Rashba says that. Okay, guys, we're going to count down 4 minutes. Everyone is invited to get a coffee, to stretch your legs, to make push-ups, whatever you want. We're starting in 4 minutes.
Nice to see a good crowd for the first daf today, Baruch Hashem.
What was that?
It's good to see a nice crowd for the first daf Sunday morning today.
It was a hard daf. At least the first time. These are relatively foreign rules. Guys, we're finishing this week, right? Right. Amazing. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We're finishing, God willing, Thursday. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Lamed Vav. We began the 5th and final chapter of Beitzah. We were learning about the concept of one for potential financial losses is allowed to exert oneself to a certain limit on Yom Tiv, and not on Shabbos. And the case the Mishnah gave, the first case the Mishnah gave is you have products that are on your roof and you are concerned that it might rain. It's not even a certain financial, and if it's going to rain, they're going to get ruined. If you have a skylight, which demands the least amount of exertion to get it off the roof into your house, that is something that is allowed on Yom Tov and not allowed on Shabbos. The Mishnah did not go into the details of, is there a quantitative limit, even though you are allowed, but is there a limit? And there were Amoraim that compared our Mishnah in Beitzah to the Mishnah Shabbos Daf Kuf Chavav regarding someone who invited guests or students to learn, group chevra to learn, and they want to clear out an area that's filled with stuff, it's filled with straw, it's filled with tvua. The issue there is not muksa, the issue is not hoitzah, it's also just about exertion. There we gave a limit that one is only allowed to schlep out to clear 4 or 5 boxes, and the Gemara is going to continue with this comparison or challenges against this comparison, Beitzah Daf Lamed Hey and Shabbos Daf Kuf Chavav. We're going to learn more about other scenarios of Tircha Yiseda, excessive exertion, and we're going to have here, that's ground zero to a very important machlokes Amoraim between Ula and Rabbi Yitzchak. If something is muktzah and may not be moved, can I move a otherwise non-muktzah keli for muktzah? Rabbi Yitzchak is stringent and he says that ein keli nitel ela lidavar hanitel. I can only move something for something else that could be moved. The example would be if something is muktzah but it's going to get ruined, and generally I will be allowed to cover it. If something is muktzah, can I take a cup or a bowl or a plate, non-muktzah, and can I use that to cover the item that's going to get ruined, even if the item is muktzah? That's the machlokes. Rabbi Yitzchak says no. Ula says yes. We're going to go back and forth between these two opinions. We're going to learn a little bit about bee trapping, whether bee trapping is a problem. As we will go into the details of that, we're going to have on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis a very strong rabbinic leniency when it comes to muktzah, which otherwise may not be moved. And that is that if the item is repulsive, one is allowed to move it. And that's called the law of Geraf Shel Re'i. I want you to know that in our kitchens now, the garbage is muktzah. You are allowed to take garbage out of your house. We're not speaking about carrying it where there's no Eidah. We're just speaking about the issue of muktzah, because if it's repulsive, for you to have a more beautiful, pleasant Shabbos, no problem. Geraf Shel Re'i, many details of that rule. And on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis on the bottom, we're going to begin the topic that will, God willing, continue tomorrow with many details, which are amazing. And that is, there are 3 categories of rabbinic prohibitions, Shabbos and Yom Tov, all about activities that biblically you may do. The sages said you may not. We normally call these restrictions shvus. Shvus means rest. Don't do it. But the word shvus is used exclusively for rabbinic prohibitions on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Now, some of these activities, which they say you may not do, even doing them would not be connected to a mitzvah at all, like climbing a tree. The sages say you can't climb a tree. That's called a shvus. There are certain activities that you may not do, but they are touched with a mitzvah. There's a certain element of mitzvah observance. That will be called rishus. And then there are other activities that are bona fide mitzvah obligations that you also may not do on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, and that's called mitzvah. So just again, the words will be shvus, rishus, and mitzvah, in which Shabbos and Yom Tov are the same. And that will be the famous statement that the only difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov is oichel nefesh, food preparation, and a lot more. We mamish left off on top of the Amid. Looks like it's a big Amid. It's a very easy daf compared to earlier dafim. I want you to know, just to point out, that normally when we quote another Mishnah, the Seder is Tanan Hassan. For some reason, this is not the only time, but until the 2 dots, maybe it was written by another Amayra, Hassan Tanan, just to point out that anomaly. So Hassan Tanan, over there, we're going back to the Mishnah Daf Kuf Chavav and Shabbos, as we learned in the previous class. If a person has boxes stored in an area and you need to free up the area, it says that this, if it's in a storage room, then you may not clear it out. If the area that you want to use is a storage place, so hold on. It's not so simple then. And Amar Shmuel, my avoloya so what does it mean? You may not clear it out. It means what that Mishnah means to say is that we allowed for you to clear out 4 or 5 boxes to make place, to have guests eating, to have people learning. But if it's in a small storage area, and if you were to clean out those 4 or 5 boxes, there would be nothing left. It would be completely cleared out. That's something that you may not do on Shabbos. Why? Because it's common in a storage area for there to be problems with the flooring. There might be holes in the floor. You never noticed it because it was packed with boxes. The moment you clear it out, you expose problems. Being that you're not allowed to fix floors on Shabbos, if you have a hole, filling up the hole is violating a biblical binyan. So the Mishnah says that even when you can clear it out, if it's in a fully clear out the room, you may not do it. That's what we learned in Shabbos. Now the Gemara wants to know, what about over here? We learned in the Mishnah, on Yom Tov, your roof is filled with grain, as the Midrash explained, Periscope, and it's about to rain. The Mishnah says you can put it through the skylight. Do we limit it? Do we say, if you're going to take it all out and you're going to expose the floor of the roof, not maybe the Mishnah, do we have that restriction? Hassan, hachamai, and we explain why we should or why we should not compare one case to the other. Do we say Hassan hu b'Shabbos the aser mishum the chamer? B'chlal Shabbos is more strict. As we learned in our Mishnah, on Shabbos, you b'chlal cannot lower any produce through the skylight. Avol Yom Tov, since Yom Tov to begin with is more lenient, then Shapir Dami, even if you removing the produce will mean that you will expose the floor of your roof, we're not concerned that if you'll find a problem, you'll fix it. We can say you won't do it. Oidelma, Hassan over there, the Ikabitl Beis HaMedrash, even though not being allowed to clear out the 4 or 5 boxes will mean less people will gather to learn. Yet, Amrat Loi, over here, the Leka Bitl Beis HaMedrash, and also Bitl Orchim, for sure, like Kolchkin, that if clearing off the roof means that you're going to fully expose the floor of the roof, then for sure you may not do it. Or we can go in the opposite direction, right? Not Tanan Hacha. Here it says, we're going to go backwards now. You are allowed to lower produce through your skylight on Yom Tov to prevent it from getting ruined. Rav Nachman added details where we limit this permit, the last narrow line. It's only if the skylight is on the roof itself that demands the least amount of work. But if there is a skylight on a neighboring roof, so you have to move the produce from this roof to that roof through the skylight, loy. And indeed, not only was this taught by Rav Nachman, by an Amayra, but later we found the Tanach, and that's even afilu keshe gagoy say and shaven when the roofs are on the same level. Why? That's called excessive exertion. Tircha yisera, as we explained when we learned the Mishnah. No one is debating that. So now the question is, hasamai. What about over there when we're speaking about we are allowed to move 4 or 5 boxes? We'll skip the parentheses. Do we say hachi over here, hu da aser? The reason why here we don't allow excessive exertion because of what we mentioned on the bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Beis, what we mentioned on Daf Beis Amud Beis, because since Yom Tov is more lenient than Shabbos, so the sages were afraid that if we won't limit certain leniencies, it's going to get out of hand. And people will become completely disrespectful to the real rules of Yom Tov. But since Shabbos to begin with is Chamiram, so if something is allowed, we're not going to limit it. And therefore, Shapir, Damir, we are allowed. What happens if your boxes are on the roof? And you have to move it from one roof to the other roof. You want to put your guest on the roof. You want to learn on the roof. You are allowed to do it. Not more than 4 or 5 boxes, but we don't have that limitation. Even over here, that there's financial loss, and we do take that into account. Yet, Amrat Loi, even though you're going to lose the money, So over there, the leka hefsed peitas, there you're not going to lose anything. Loy kolchchen, that you should not be allowed. Another question. Hachi over here, Tanya, we have a Beitzah that adds to the details of our Mishnah. Lo yishal shalom b'chevel b'chaloimis. Like we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah last year, that even if the window is not like in the picture that Kevan showed, think about your roof on your house, and if you go down on the side of the wall, there's a window. And if you're going to lower the produce in a basket on a rope, it's relatively easy. You're not picking it up. Up is hard. Down is easy. Even that is not allowed. You can't take it down through a ladder. That's too hard. Only pushing it through the skylight. Because we limit our permit. So the question will be over there, Hasamai, if the only way you can move the 4 or 5 boxes is by lowering it with a rope or by going through a ladder, do we allow it? Do we not allow it? Do we say here we are limiting the permit because the leka bittul beis hamedrash? Because what's going to happen? You'll only lose money, but people are not going to stop learning. Abul Shabbos, the ikal bittul, and the Masechta Shabbos, the case. The reason why you are allowed to move it to begin with is because if not, people won't be able to gather, or people won't be able to have the guests that they want to have, which is a mitzvah. That's why maybe we will be more lenient. Oidilma, the opposite. Hachid the Ika Hefsid paid is still Amrat Loi. Over there, that there's no financial loss, Loi Kolchrein. So regarding all of these questions, we say that this stands Tekum. I think it's very difficult. That's why to apply what's Tircha, what's Tircha Yeseda. It's a very difficult thing. Okay. The next case in the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis was similar, that you have produce and it's exposed, you put it out to dry, it might rain or it's raining. Says the Mishnah that on Yom Tif, you are allowed to cover produce, protecting it from the dripping rain. Umachasin esapes. Now the case of the Mishnah was foods themselves are not muksa, it's food. Amarula now comes, or this, like we said in the intro, this is the big machlokes between Ula and Rabbi Yitzchak. Says Ula that afilu aveda delivnei, even rows of bricks. Aveda is from the word avir, ear. Oh, it's not bricks that are cemented together. We're not speaking about a building. We're speaking about if you have bricks that you plan to use in construction, and if they will get wet, they will get ruined to a certain degree. You are allowed to cover it also. Now that's a novelty. Why is that a novelty? Because bricks or any other item designated for construction is muksa. And therefore they may not be moved. Even if there would not be an issue of excessive exertion. You can't move bricks. Muksa. So what? Says Ula, but I can take a cloth or I can take a keli or whatever I'm going to be, a tarp, whatever I'm using to cover, I can carry it to cover muksa. However, Rabbi Yitzchak says, no, that our Mishnah Dafka mentioned peiros, which are ru'uyin themselves to be moved. But if you have an item that's muksa, you may not move a non-muksa keli for muksa. The Azar Rabbi Yitzchak l'taimei, the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, ein keli nitel el l'davar anitel b'Shabbos. Yovaldik. Okay, so that's a machlokes between Ula and Rabbi Yitzchak. And now let's begin to see if either of them will be refuted. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, so the Gemara says, why don't we infer from our Mishnah against Ula? Peidosin, avir the livni loy. Says the Gemara, no, that's no proof at all, because maybe you are not feel avir the livni. You know why the Mishnah spoke about in case 2, you can cover kalim, because case number 1 was speaking about kalim. Now in case number 1, no one is suggesting, even on Yom Tiv, for you to be allowed through the skylight to move muksa. That you can't do. No, the first case was you can lower the grain. Yeah, that has to be a non-muksa item. So once the Mishnah began, either the Tana Reisha, Mashil and Peiros, just for symmetry, Tana Seifa, Mechasen es Peiros, and but according to Ula, even bricks. 1 second.
All right, the rope used to lower the grain, that the rope is not muksa?
Kevin, we just learned the Beitzah that you may not use a rope to lower the grain. You can only push it through the skylight, and a rope is not muksa. Why would a rope be muksa?
Not sure. Just it's a weekday item.
I don't see why a rope should be muksa. There's so many purposes that you can use a rope. You can use it as a gartel.
We tie our shoelaces to rope.
With a rope, you can tie the Tefilla on Simchas Torah to make him think that he doesn't know. So when he steps back, well, he'll get caught. Yeah. Okay, right. Now, next, it says in our Mishnah, the same thing could yontav, according to Rashi. You can cover barrels. So here again, why did the Mishnah? Here you can't say to be symmetric. The Reisha never spoke about barrels. So the Mishnah is adding another example. According to Ula, why wouldn't the Mishnah give an example of muksa? Is araya that not muksa? Barrels, yeah, muksa not. The Gemara says no. Who says it's not muksa? Maybe the barrels that the Mishnah is speaking about, it's speaking about the barrels of wine that were not tied, something, and therefore they're muksa. Fakir, the Mishnah gives an example of muksa. And not only maybe, if the Mishnah will be speaking simply about barrels of wine that are already good, fit to be consumed. So why is the Mishnah even giving this as an added example? We already spoke about praise. It's like, who needs that? You're not adding anything. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. To the other side. You know why? Because the there is a novelty by adding barrels. Salka daita chamino, like we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah, if you have grain that's mamash exposed, they will get completely sogged with water, saturated with water, and ruined. Barrels, you can't say it's going to get ruined. There's less of a loss. So, maybe the reason why you can push down grain through the skylight is because it's going to get completely ruined. Maybe only lahafsid meruba chashashu. But lahafsid what? One might have thought loy chashashu, maybe you won't even be allowed on Yom Tov to put it down through the skylight. That's why the Mishnah gave an example, but it doesn't prove either way, but you cannot refute either side with it. Next, it says...
Rabbi, quick question. We're talking about the payers on the fruit. So if it's grain, wouldn't grain be muksa anyhow, especially on Shabbos for sure, because you can't use it for anything. And if it's the fruits that we're drying, which we learned in the last parak, unless it's fully dried, that's in between. I guess maybe it's a machlokes, but could be that's muksa also. So that would be similar to the bricks. You can't use it. You're just trying to save it.
So we learned many times together, Danny, that they used to snack on grain. That was a common thing. It's not true. Flour is
that was roasted kernels, not like a
no fresh. Yeah, it's not true. That's what they ate. I think we had a lot. We had a lot in Beitzah even about grain, about what you could do, what you can do with it. Okay, weiter.
Okay.
Tanach, we learned in our Mishnah, the third case in our Mishnah was noisten keli tachas hadela. If you are allowed to put a keli, even on Shabbos, if there is delef, means there's dripping water going into your house, you can capture it in utensils, preventing that water from flooding your house, from ruining your house. That's called a hefsid meruba, a big loss if your house will get flooded. Then even on Shabbos, you can do that work. Now, it's a good point. Water that's dripping through your house is disgusting. All right, don't think about just you have a hole in your roof. No one has a hole in the roof. It's water that's seeping through a crack and it's getting dirty. And that water is muktzah. It's water that is completely unusable as muktzah. And the fact that you are allowed to take a keli to capture the water, doesn't that disprove Rabbi Yitzchak? Rabbi Yitzchak holds you cannot move a utensil for muktzah. Water, dripping water is disgusting. So the Gemara says not necessarily. Maybe it's not usable for people to drink from it, but animals will drink from it. Bedela fara'ui. And that will be the case. That will be the only case of the Mishnah. Tashema, now let's go to Beitzah. From our Mishnah, we couldn't prove or refute anyone. It says in a Beitzah, a person machatzelis, you are allowed to spread a mat. Al gabel leveinim b'Shabbos. Clear. You can spread a mat on bricks. Guys, bricks is muktzah. So that's a raya to Ula. That's a question on Rabbi Yitzchak. Answers the Gemara, no. Not all bricks are muktzah. When people build, once it's piled for construction, muktzah. But after you build and you have leftovers of materials which were commonly used for people to sit on, that was like your outside furniture, a couple of bricks. The yatur mibinyana, building materials, bricks, that are the leftovers from a project in which the owner did not regather them, then since the chazi lemizga alayu, since it's fit to be sat upon, they're not muksa. And only there can you spread the mat. Next, Toshma we learned in a Beitzah, you can spread a mat on top of stones. Again, stones get ruined. I don't know, some stones get ruined from the rain, and you can spread it. And now stones are muksa. What are you going to say over here? Bricks you can sit upon because they're square. Stones are speaking about stam stones. So the Gemara says, no, the stones must be ba'arbanim mikur zolois. There was certain type of round, smooth but pointed stones. That was your typical toilet paper in the times of Chazal. And as we learned in Shabbos, that one is allowed to move these stones because of kavod abriyos. Since the chazi and lebeis hakisei, even if there is no latrine right here, but stones that people would use to wipe themselves, which are not muksa, those are the stones that you may cover. And according to Rabbi Yitzchak, again, he stands that ein keli nitel elo l'davar hanitel b'shabbos. Toshima says in a Beitzah, al gabi kaveres devoidim, you are allowed to spread a mat on top of a beehive. And now we're going to get off on a tangent a lot about trapping bees. Why would you spread a mat on a beehive? The Shabbos, on Shabbos, if it's Bachama, now we're going to interpret now, Bachama means in the summer months, because it's very hot for the bees. You can protect them. Bikshamim, if it's we're interpreting now in the winter. That's the interpretation now. In the winter, you can cover it because it's rain, and again, rain is going to ruin it or whatever, it will inconvenience them. So as long as you don't intend to trap the bees. Now, the problem is, my friends, that a beehive is muktzah. The whole beehive is for bees. It's not for people. It's not designated for human use. So according to Rabbi Yitzchak, why would you be? It's very nice that you care about your bees, but it's muktzah. You should not be allowed to cover it with a mat. So the Gemara says, nah, beehive, when there is honey, is not muktzah, because the beehive is not designated only for bees. The beehive is also to be used by people. So the Gemara challenges that. From Meshon to Ravashi, Tanach, good. It fits the clause, during summer there is honey and beehives. But now mind you, the Beitzah never used the words Yemois Hakshamim. That will be the answer we'll have a Lamed Beis. But right now we are understanding Ubig Shamim means during winter. During winter, there's no honey. So it should be muktzah. Yet you are allowed to cover it with a mat. Keli is nitel, even for something that's not nitel. Ma'ikal Meimar answers the Gemara loy nisracham elo lo oisen shtei chalus. Even during the winter, when people would take out the honey from beehives, they wouldn't only take out the honey, they would also take out the honeycombs, but they would leave two for the bees to have sustenance over winter. And since honeycombs are fit for human consumption, and eventually they will be taken out, you can't say a beehive is muktzah even during the winter because of the two chalos. The Gemara says that's not a good answer, because those two honeycombs, chalos, honeycombs, are left for the bees. If something is designated only for the bees, doesn't make it non-muktzah, it's still muktzah. Ois and shtei chalos are muktzahs, hein. So the Gemara says, yeah, but if you decided prior to Shabbos, you know what? Very nice for the bees, but I need those honeycombs. And if you plan to take it, now you rendered it not muktzah. That before Shabbos, you changed their designation. You decided to take, doesn't matter when, you decided to take those two honeycombs. The Gemara says, hold on, if that's the case, meaning, but if you did not make such a kavana, then indeed you won't be allowed to spread the mat, according to Rabbi Yitzchak. So frek the Gemara, why did the Beitzah have to go completely off tangent? As long as you don't intend to trap, that is when it's prohibited. Say something even better. Lifloik the litni b'didah. make a differentiation between two things that are even more similar. Don't introduce something new. Why don't you say, when are you allowed to spread the mat? If you intend to eat the honeycombs. Then even if you're not trapping, it's still usher. So the Gemara says, well, that's exactly what the Beitzah means to say. That which already implies that if loy chishav aleim is usher, it's already hinted to, and even if chishav aleim, ubavat shelo yischaben lotzud. Now, before we come back to Ahmed Beis, to the whole answer that who says the honeycomb has no honey, the kshamim doesn't mean that it's during the winter. Before we come back to that, the Gemara now is in between the lines going to say the following: Machlekes Ula and Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak is the machmer. Rabbi Yitzchak holds that if I'm taking a non-muksa item for muksa, I'm not allowed to do that. We have this general machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon as far as how broad or how limited do you apply muksa. We have a machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon concerning davar she'ein mischaven, something that's being done unintentionally. In all of these cases, Rabbi Yehuda is the machmir, Rabbi Shimon is the mekal. The Gemara is taking it as a given that this chumrah of Rabbi Yitzchak, ein keli nitel ella l'davar hanitel b'Shabbos, is only following the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. If Rabbi Yitzchak would have sided with Rabbi Shimon, since Rabbi Shimon is b'chlal very lenient, then even for a muksa le Rabbi Shimon, one will be allowed to carry something else. This premise is not written, and it's not going to be refuted. It's a given. In other words, the whole Rabbi Yitzchak only fits with the school of Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't fit with the school of Rabbi Shimon. And therefore, what did we attempt to do? We have a Beitzah that says that you can cover a beehive with a mat. And the Gemara is making an effort to reconcile this Beitzah fits with Rabbi Yitzchak, which automatically means this Beitzah is following Rabbi Yehuda. Because if you're making it go with Rabbi Yitzchak follows Rabbi Yehuda in the general question of what is muksa, what's not muksa, in the general question regarding davar she'ein mischaven, davar she'nischaven, malacha she'ein tzricha l'guf, and all of these areas where Rabbi Yehuda is the machmer. So it says the Gemara, b'ma yorkimta, when you are attributing this Beitzah, when you are saying the Beitzah fits with Rabbi Yitzchak, it's tantamount to you saying that this Beitzah can follow Rabbi Yehuda. The Islay Muksa, again, because according to Rabbi Shimon's narrower application of Muksa, even Rabbi Yitzchak will agree that you are allowed to carry a keli for something that lit Rabbi Shimon as Muksa. So Amos Seifa, hold on. When it says, what does it even help if you don't intend to trap? This not intending and therefore okay, that's only Rabbi Shimon. Asan let Rabbi Shimon, the other mutter. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it should be usher because you're trapping the Valdika question. So the Gemara takes a step back. Whoa, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's good? No. Why not? Because because psikration. It says the Gemara answers by asking you a question. Your whole logic doesn't make sense. You're telling me that it only fits with Rabbi Shimon. It doesn't fit according to Rabbi Shimon. Because the Rabbi Shimon, that will be good. Then if you don't intend to trap the bees, you're good. How can that be? Both Abaye and Rav, they both came to the same page. Not initially, but ultimately they both agreed that what? That if you're doing something, you're cutting off the head of the chicken, even though your intention is not to kill the chicken. You only want to give your kid a toy to play. Your kid is looking forward to play with the head of the chicken. You may not do it. You have no intention, because there's no way that you can cut the head of the chicken off without the chicken dying. You're going to cut off the head and it won't die. And that's the rule. Whenever it's inevitable, then even according to Rabbi Shimon, it's prohibited. So what does your intent b'chlal matter? So therefore, whatever you'll answer for Rabbi Shimon, I'll answer for Rabbi Yehuda. La'olam kol Rabbi Yehuda, which is why we are correct to say that the Beitzah fits with Rabbi Yitzchak. Yes, it fits with Rabbi Yehuda. What must be the case of the Beitzah? On the last line of the Amid, the isbei kave, not coffee. Kave means windows. In other words, you have the mouth of the beehive that you're covering with a mat so the rain should not go in and ruin it, but you have holes on the sides of the beehives through which the bees can go out. So when you cover it, you're not inevitably trapping it. You're making it a lot harder for the bees to go out, but it's not psikresha. They are not trapped in there and on a definite level. And veloy tema l'Rabbi Yehuda ubelvat shelo yischaven lotzud. Now, I will have to make one emendation. In other words, the words, as long as you don't intend, those words don't work with Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, your intention makes no difference. What the Beitzah really has to be amended to say, what type of beehive may you cover with a mat to protect it from getting ruined? A beehive that you will not render it into a trap when you cover it, because if you render it into a trap, then you're not allowed to do it because you're trapping the bees. And parenthetically, here you see that even bugs or other creatures that most don't trap may not be trapped on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Why would the Beitzah even have to say that? Of course, if you're going to be trapping the bees, right? If you're going to be trapping the bees, it should be prohibited. No, that's a chiddush. Maybe the prohibition of trapping is only for creatures that are commonly trapped, species that are commonly trapped. But which are bees, people don't normally trap bees, then mutter. So the Mishnah has to do, the Beitzah is saying, no, that the isur, the prohibition of trapping is on all creatures. And it must be speaking about, again, a honeycomb, a beehive that has windows in the sides. Now, we explained this entire Beitzah, Lishitas, Rabbi Yehuda, what will Rab Shimon hold? So let's quickly learn the top Tosfos. It's a very interesting Tosfos. Make sure you don't cover all the windows. Because if you were to cover all the windows, Rashi adds the words, then according to Rabbi Yehuda it will be Aser, but according to Rab Shimon it will be Mutter. Because Rashi is trying to make this Beitzah dafka go according to Rab Shimon. And Tosfos says if you're covering all the windows, then even according to Rab Shimon it should be Aser. Psikresha. So Tosfos has a very big chiddush over here. This is the example that in a beehive there's always going to be a little hole somewhere through which a bee can escape. It's only about how easy is it for the bee to escape. And just like Rabbi Yehuda is generally more machmir by muktzah, he's more machmir by davar she'ein eschaven. Rabbi Yehuda has a different understanding of psikresha. According to Rab Shimon, you know when we say that's only if it's mamish for sure going to happen. You cut off the head of the chicken is going to die. If you cover a beehive and there's one possibility that might be the hardest possibility in the world for a bee to escape, if a bee can escape, according to Rab Shimon, there's no problem. Or there's a machlekes according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon how to interpret psikresha. You have a sugar package, and you're not allowed to rip letters. So can a person say, I don't have to look, I'm going to rip it? There's a little possibility that my cut is going to go not in between the letters. And therefore, it's not psikresha. Can you say that? That's l'chayda the machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon is very lenient in saying if something is not absolutely going to happen, we can say it's not psikresha. And let's go back in the Gemara, but this is a very big Tosfos. Rav Ashi Omar, like we mentioned on Amud Aleph, I reject the whole question. Forget about the whole. You're telling me that there's no honey, so it's muktzah, so there's honeycombs, and you had intention. Nah, mi ktani biyamoisachama. Does it say biyamoisak shamim? No, it says bachama. You want to cover it when it's hot, to protect it from the heat. Bikshama means you want to protect it when it's raining, not during winter. Big difference. It can already start raining during Tishrei in the Holy Land, or Cheshvan before winter, and there is still honey in there. Both by Nisan and by Tishrei, by the in between seasons, the Ikachama, the Ikakshamim, the Ikadavash, So therefore, this whole intention and honeycombs is not necessary to explain how this Beitzah does not refute Rabbi Yitzchak. Next, the third case in the Mishnah was up to the two dots on Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis, that if your house is going to get ruined because it's leaking in your house, you are allowed to put out utensils to capture the dripping water, even on Shabbos. And Tanavi learned, I don't care how much work you'll have to do. Im nismali hakeli shoifech v'shoina ve'ena nimna. Even if the bucket is filling up, you have to pour it out, put the bucket back. So be it. You're not violating a biblical malacha. Yes, we want for people not to have to do exertion, but on the other hand, you're going to ruin your house. Says the Gemara story. Abaya owned a mill room. Now the millstones were somehow built out of stones and hardened mud. Abaya's source of livelihood would get ruined because of excessive rain. You have to know how things were made then. A little bit of rain would do nothing, but it began to pour so much into Abaya's rechaya in his mill room that he could have lost his parnasa. Now, by the way, here putting a bucket won't help you. Putting a bucket won't help you because it was raining on the millstones. You couldn't cover the millstones. The only solution would be to move the stones out of that room. The millstones are bona fide muktzah. Our Mishnah never allowed moving muktzah. To be said that even the water that you are capturing, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, is drinkable water, non-muktzah water. So he wanted to know if there's a heter. Also, the Rabbi, he came to Rabbi, his teacher. Rabbi gave him a heter. Guys, this is such a Jewish story. Sometimes you get a heter and you feel, I'm not comfortable with the heter. I want to be more machmir. So Amalei, what's that? He gave a brilliant heter. He says, Zil ailei lipurech lasan, bring your bed into the mill room, make it into your bedroom. You can't sleep near millstones because millstones that are wet, it smells. It becomes something repulsive. Now, it's not repulsive in the work environment, but if you're making this right now into your home environment, it's repulsive. And as we spoke on in the introduction, that as stringent as we are for muktzah, if there is something repulsive in your environment, even if it's muktzah, you can remove it. So he says, move your bed in there. Now you render the millstones into something repulsive, and now you are allowed to move them out, move them away from the leaking rain. You're going to save your millstones.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Everything we learned about the disgusting spit the other day is the idea that was not within your private environment.
Which disgusting spits?
The spit that you already roasted.
No, I don't.
After you roasted.
Yeah. It's not. It's disgusting, Yaakov, to use them again, but they don't ruin your environment. Unlike garbage, unlike foul-smelling, wet millstones.
I see.
Okay. So Yosef Abaye v'kokashule. So Abaye began to challenge his teacher, and he says, "No, you can't lechatchila make something. You can't create something repulsive if it's there already." So he's beginning to push back on the heter. You know what happened? As he's pushing back, the millstones collapsed. Abaye lost his parnasa there. The whole thing collapsed, and Abaye took away Amar. Tasily, I earned that punishment. You know why? The Avri Adamar, because I was pushing against the heter of my teacher. Look inside the third Tosfos. Abaye had a good point. Abaye did have a good point, right? That what the ein oisen graf shel lechatchila. Nevertheless, says Tosfos that here you are allowed. You know why? Because you're going to lose your millstones. V'chulei v'chulei. Back in the Gemara. Amar Shmuel says Shmuel. Graf shel literally means they had no plumbing. They didn't have toilets the way we have it. They would have buckets. So the bucket that's designated for excrement. Va'avid shel meraglayim are the vessels in which people urinated in. So muter lohitzion la'ashpa, they're muktzah, they're not. What are you going to use them for? I don't care. It smells. Move them to the garbage. Not only that, But when you want to bring it back, you can argue, how can you move the bucket? How can you move these kalim? They're already out. You wanted to have it in the house because that was your bathroom in the house if you need it. So you have to find a heter. What do? You put water in it. A person would never drink from that water, but animals would. After the keli is emptied from the garbage, you fill it up with water, so then you can bring it back. In other words, savur minei. Okay, in other words, he was finding leniencies to make life more livable, and not to say you can only move the graf shalei when it's mamish disgusting. Now that it's already outside your environment, it's stuck. No, find a way to bring it back. Now, savur minei, they thought that even when you are moving something repulsive, you can't handle that which is repulsive by itself. You can only move it through another utensil, which is the example of these kalim in which people relieve themselves. No one is moving the excrement themselves. So savrimine, that graf shalei only agav mana in may only be moved if what you are handling physically is a keli. But bifnei atzmai loy, but the excrement itself, and no one is advocating that, but maybe that's so disgusting that you may not even move it. It's not true. If you want to clean your environment, there are no muksa, get it out. Tashema, the example of something as repulsive as excrement is a mouse or a rodent. That ahu achbarta, there was once a mouse. The ishtakach be is parmiki that was found in the spices of the house of Ravashi. So it's interesting. Also, it's relative because a mouse is not that repulsive, but a mouse in your spice cabinet is repulsive. It was in a place doesn't belong there. So Amar Lahu Ravashi. Ravashi said, "Nokta bitsutzi." So you grab it by the tail, grabbing the thing itself, and va'afkua, and throw it out. So you can even directly handle something repulsive if need be.
Dead mouse?
Huh?
Is this a dead mouse?
I don't know that, Danny.
It's alive. Maybe it would be a trapping issue, though.
Could be Danny's right. Yeah. And that's Taka White's Taka. I was thinking, why is it disgusting? So I was thinking because it's in spices. You're right. I'm a dead mouse anywhere. There is no trapping issue, but it's a muksa issue, and you can move it out because graf shalei. All right.
Is our garbage in our homes also muksa, and you can only move it because it's in a living environment?
Yes, it's graf shalei. Today, even though the garbage is relatively cleaner with all the shtick, you are allowed to take a garbage and move it out. A garbage is mamash muksa. No problem.
Isn't something that's repulsive a personal preference? I find other things repulsive and that I don't want in my house that you might not find repulsive.
Tanach, kick them out. Grab those things by their tail and throw them out. That's the message. Mishnah. Kol shechayavim alam. Oh, so here we go. So we have, normally midrabanan is the word that we use for rabbinic rules. Unique Shabbos and Yom Tiv is that we call it a shvus. The sage says rest, means don't do something. Now we're going to learn a specified application. Like we said in the introduction, you have shvus, you have rishus, and you have mitzvah. Shvus is this rabbinic, don't do something. And the activity is not mitzvah related at all. That's when we use the word shvus. Rishus means that there is some mitzvah element to it, but you're not obligated. Still, there are times that the sages said, don't do it, but they call that rishus. And then there are times that there is a real mitzvah, and yet the sages say, don't do it, and we're going to call that mitzvah. So, kol shechayav olav, whether it's in the category of shvus, whether it's in the category of rishus, whether it's in the category of mitzvah, unlike the first Mishnah in the chapter that we learned in the last daf, that we made a difference, we differentiated between Shabbos and Yom Tov. In that case, we were lenient on Yom Tov, we were strict on Shabbos. Here, we're going to equate them, where it won't make a difference. Whenever there's a shvus issue, rishus issue, mitzvah issue, b'Shabbos chayom mishum b'Shabbos, whenever it's on Shabbos, you should know as a rule, you don't say, we'll be more lenient on Yom Tov. Tirchayeh, but not shvus, rishus, and mitzvah. Chayavin olav b'Yom Tov. Chayavin means rabbinically. And now the Mishnah wants to give examples of all of these rabbinic decrees in the category, some examples Shvus, others rishus, other mitzvah. Ve'elai mishum shvus. Example, loy olam ilan. You're not allowed to ascend a tree. Cannot climb a tree on Shabbos nor on Yom Tov. That's the point of the Mishnah. Number 2, v'loy rechven al gava behema. You're not allowed to ride on an animal. Number 3, v'loy shatan al pnei hamayim. You're not allowed to swim. You're not allowed to swim in water. You can jump in the pool. You can't swim in the pool. And we quoted this above. You're not allowed to clap your hands. You're not allowed to slap your thighs. You're not allowed to dance. Guys, we just learned a few daf ago just to know that Tosfos says that this rabbinic is inapplicable today, and that Ramah Paskins like Tosfos, but we're learning the Mishnah now, and all of these activities are called Shavus. They're not allowed on Shabbos. They're not allowed on Yom Tov. Next, what rules, what rabbinic rules of don't do is connected to a mitzvah element. We may not adjudicate, and we're going to go into Gemara details. There are actually certain dinei Torah that are called mitzvah. There are other times that you can't call it an obligation, but if you act as the judge, when you're qualified, you're doing something good. That may not be done, not on Shabbos, not on Yom Tov. You may not give a woman kiddushin. We're not speaking about nesuyin, we're speaking about kiddushin. It was actually relatively common for people to do kiddushin erev Shabbos in the afternoon, even though the marriage was finalized on Shabbos. We'll speak about that another time. But kiddushin may not be done. That's a kinyan, even though it's rishus. The Gemara is going to say, why is it rishus? Why isn't it a bona fide mitzvah? We'll get all that in the Gemara. If there's a need to do chalitza, right? Remember chalitza. So to Reuven and Shimon, Reuven is married to a woman. Reuven passes away with no children, not with her, not with other. He left a widow. If Reuven has a brother or brothers, then they have to either do chalitza or yibum. That may not be done on Shabbos nor on Yom Tov. The Elyahu mishum mitzvah, the examples the Mishnah will give is loy makadishin. You may not designate an animal for a carbon, which is a mitzvah. Can't do it on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. Loy marichin. You can't make a erech vow, a assessment vow, by using the words erki, olai, erkecha, olai, v'chulei. You cannot declare something to be cherem. Cherem here, Rashi says, our Mishnah follows the opinion, stam cherem lebedek habayis. Cherem is another word that you can use to consecrate something for temple upkeep, which is a mitzvah. You may not do that on Shabbos nor on Yom Tov. V'loy magbihin. You may not separate, even though the word is to elevate, but it's to elevate and to separate. Not trumais umaisres, says the Mishnah. Kol el b'Yom Tov amru kal v'chaimer b'Shabbos. And here comes the big liner, ein bein Yom Tov l'Shabbos. If you want to know the difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos, it's ella, oichel, nefesh, bulvad. Food-related activities is where Yom Tov is more lenient. How ironic, huh? I love Rebbe. Even though in the last Mishnah we learned, no, that tircha on Yom Tov is allowed and on Shabbos not. Even though we follow Hillel, that it's not just ella, oichel, nefesh. V'toich shehutra oichel nefesh, the Mishnah here wants to point out that sometimes we equate them. Let's go at least a little bit to go through every single case. Why are you not allowed to climb up on a tree? Now here's something very important. Because you might rip off a branch. Now guys, remember one rule. We generally never make a decree for a decree. If you climb up a tree and you unintentionally break a branch, you did not violate biblical koitzin. The sages will never make a decree that you may not do something because you might, like for example, we are allowed to walk on grass on Shabbos. You might uproot grass, even if you do so, you didn't do so with intent. We paskin like Rab Shimon, Davashem Eschaven. So that's why in every single case, and Rashi is going to point it out, they were afraid that you will deliberately rip up something. If you remember, when you were young, climbing trees, sometimes that branch has to get out of the way. That is where, if you'll deliberately rip it off, you'll be violating a biblical violation. So now, Chachamim made a fence, never climb a tree. And by the way, it's not only climbing, we cannot use a tree, we cannot lean on a tree. If there is a swing directly on the tree, you're not allowed to go on the swing. If you remember all the pratim, it's called tzideihen asir, tzidei mutar. If from the tree comes a hook, right? Hammock. And then you hang a hammock, 100% okay, because it's removed from the tree. But all of that began with you not being allowed to climb a tree because you might deliberately take off a branch. Next, you're not allowed to ride on an animal. Why? Because you might go outside the tchum. And that's the point. Ooh, if tchum is only a rabbinic issue, again, we're never going to make a decree to protect another decree. Which is the das yachid. According to many peoples, even the 12,000 amas is only, or 13,000 only midrabanan. So everyone says, no, you're wrong. The reason why you're not allowed to ride on an animal is you might cut off a branch to use as a whip. That's why you'll do that deliberately. You're not allowed to swim. Why? You might make a swimmer's tube. Making a swimmer's tube is number one, they would weave reeds together. We learned that on Shabbos. And Tikkun Mana, making a utensil. And then the Alter Rebbe therefore paskins that if you are in a swimming pool that looks like a river, it has no rim protruding up in the sides. When you're in it, the water splashes over. That is similar to a river. You may not swim. If you are in a barrel or in any swimming pool that has a tall rim that contains all of the water inside, then by the letter of the law, you can swim, as it says in Shulchan Aruch. Let's go one more line. You can't clap, you can't slap your thighs, you can't dance. Why? Because you might fix a utensil, and therefore the Chachamim said it's usher. Let's leave it over here. I know I wanted to go a little bit further, but we're up to 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, to be continued.
Can you hang a hammock on a tree? Because you don't want that branch to break at all.
Sidei Tzedeim is mutter. If a hammock on the tree is asur because it's an extension of not being allowed to climb. And if you hang it on a hook that's on the tree, then you're so far removed from climbing the tree, then it's mutter. Because even when the hammock is on the tree itself, you're not going to deliberately break off a branch. Why would you do that? It's an extension. But they stopped the extension by the side of the side.
Rabbi, what is the kaitzer of the branch? If you're climbing it, that's not real kaitzer, right? But this isn't kaitzer because you want to harvest something or something like that. Wouldn't that be like it's not what do you call it? Malacha machshavas or whatever it is? No,
it's a good question.
Because that would, in a way, deem it really rabbinic, and then it's
that's a good question. I'm sure the Rishonim speak about that because that's a problem. In other words, the whole point of the Gemara is can't be exeda l'gzeira. Every concern has to be a doiraisa, has to be worked out.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Quick practical question about the bees. If an insect is inside your house on Yom Tov and it's bechezkas mazik, can you trap it? I'm living currently in a place with a lot of scorpions.
Oh, for sure. A scorpion, yeah. I'm trying to remember. I think we are even more lenient than that.
Well, Bachlal, every time you open and close your door, right now I'm trapping flies.
No, that's not true. No, we learned a few daf ago because after it's in the house, you still have to trap it. It's not trapped yet. No, Yaakov, there's a heter. There is something that can damage you. You can get rid of it.
And do we take that all the way down to like a honeybee? And
a mosquito. You can't kill it. You can trap it. Yeah, I'm gonna confirm that. If I'm not mistaken, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
You're welcome.